They told us it was a simple experiment, nothing more than a controlled test of human endurance. But from the moment I stepped into that underground facility, I knew something wasn't right because the air itself felt wrong, heavy. Like it had been breathed too many times by people who are no longer alive, and yet somehow still there watching you from behind the walls. And even though I was just a junior researcher assigned to monitor vitals and log behavioural patterns, I could feel it pressing down on me, that quiet dread that settles into your bones before anything has even begun. And still I stayed, because curiosity is a powerful thing, far more dangerous than fear, and at the time I believed I could handle whatever came next. I believed we all could. The subjects arrived late that evening. 5 men pulled from military prisons. Each one promised freedom if they could endure 30 days inside a sealed chamber, filled with a stimulant gas designed to eliminate the need for sleep, and they looked normal enough at first glance, tired but hopeful, the kind of men who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain, which made them perfect for this kind of experiment, disposable yet motivated. And as they were led into the chamber, laughing nervously and making jokes about finally getting some peace and quiet, I remember thinking how human they seemed, how ordinary, and how quickly that would change. The chamber itself was a reinforced steel room with thick glass observation windows, microphones for communication, and no cameras because the gas interfered with electronics, or at least that was the official explanation, though later I would come to question that detail more than anything else, because not seeing what was happening inside forced us to rely on sound. And sometimes what you hear is far worse than anything you could ever see, especially when the human mind begins to unravel. For the first few days, everything went exactly as planned. The men talked among themselves, shared stories, whispered secrets they probably thought would never leave that room, and their voices carried through the speakers in soft, constant murmurs that almost felt comforting, like proof that the experiment was working and that we were in control. They laughed, they argued, they sang at times, and we recorded everything, noting slight increases in stress levels, but nothing alarming, nothing that hinted at what was coming. And I remember one of the senior researchers saying that if this continued, it would be one of the most successful human trials in history. By day 5, things began to shift, subtle at first. The conversations grew darker, less structured, as if their thoughts were slipping out of alignment. Paranoia started creeping into their voices. They began to complain about each other, accusing one another of whispering things at night, of plotting, of watching them while they pretended to sleep, even though none of them were supposed to be sleeping at all. And that was the first time I felt a chill run down my spine, because the gas was working. They hadn't slept, not once, and yet they were starting to dream while fully awake. By day 7, the laughter was gone completely, replaced by long stretches of silence broken only by sudden outbursts of frantic speech, each man talking over the others, trying to be heard, trying to prove something none of us could understand. And then came the screaming. One of them began to scream at the top of his lungs, hour after hour, until his voice broke into a raw, wet rasp, and eventually stopped entirely, not because he calmed down, but because he physically could no longer produce sound. And what terrified us most was that the others didn't react. They didn't try to stop him, didn't acknowledge it at all. It was as if he had already ceased to exist to them. That was the moment we should have ended it. That was the moment any sane group of researchers would have shut off the gas and opened the chamber. But we didn't, because by then it wasn't just an experiment anymore. It was something else, something we didn't fully understand but couldn't look away from. And when the second subject started whispering directly into one of the microphones, speaking so softly we had to increase the gain just to hear him, repeating the same phrase over and over again in a calm, almost soothing tone, that's when I realized we had crossed a line we could never come back from, because whatever was happening inside that chamber, it wasn't just sleep deprivation anymore. It was something far worse, something that had been waiting patiently beneath the surface of the human mind, and we had just given it a reason to come out. Panic spread through the facility almost instantly, trained soldiers hesitating at the threshold of the chamber, as if some primal instinct was warning them not to step inside, and yet orders were orders, and within seconds they moved in, weapons raised, shouting commands that sounded hollow and meaningless against what stood before them, because the 2 remaining subjects didn't resist, didn't attempt to escape. They simply watched, smiling in that same unnatural way, as if they had been waiting for this moment all along. One of the soldiers approached too quickly, and that was all it took, because the nearest subject moved with a speed that shouldn't have been possible for a body in that condition, closing the distance in a blur and tearing into him with bare hands. The sound that followed wasn't a scream at first, but something more broken, more confused, as if his mind couldn't process what was happening to him, and by the time the others reacted and opened fire, it was already too late. Blood spreading across the chamber floor as chaos erupted in a confined space that suddenly felt far too small to contain what was inside it. Even under gunfire, the subjects didn't behave like humans, they didn't retreat, didn't try to defend themselves in any recognizable way. They kept moving forward, relentless, driven by something beyond pain, beyond survival, and it took multiple shots, far more than should have been necessary, just to bring one of them down, and even then, as his body collapsed, there was no sign of relief in his expression, only that same eerie calm, as if death itself had lost its meaning. The second subject was restrained, barely, pinned down by sheer force and desperation, thrashing with a strength that made no sense given his condition, and as the medical team rushed in, arguing over whether to terminate him or preserve what remained for study, he began to laugh again, that same soft, quiet laugh we had heard days before, and it echoed through the chamber like a memory we couldn't escape. And I remember one of the doctors shouting that we needed answers, that we couldn't let this end without understanding what had happened, and against every rational instinct, they chose to keep him alive. He was strapped to a surgical table, his body barely holding together, yet his eyes remained fixed on us, alert, aware, following every movement with unsettling precision, and when the anaesthetic was brought in, he reacted violently, not out of fear but anger, a deep, visceral rage that seemed to come from somewhere far beyond the physical, screaming in a voice that tore through the room that he must not be put to sleep. That sleep was where it waited, where it hid, and that if we forced him back into it, we would lose everything. The lead researcher, pale but determined, leaned in and asked the question none of us had dared to voice. His hands trembling despite his attempt to appear composed, and he said, "What are you?" And for a moment the subject went still, the struggle fading as that unnatural smile returned, wider than before, stretching across a face that no longer looked entirely human, and in a voice that was almost calm, almost patient, he answered, "We are you." The room fell silent, no one moving, no one breathing, because deep down we all understood what he meant, even if we didn't want to accept it. And he continued, his voice steady, almost conversational, as if explaining something obvious to a group of children, saying that they were the part of the human mind that people bury every night when they sleep, the part that thrives in darkness, in silence, in the absence of control, the part that civilization had trained itself to forget, and that the gas hadn't created anything new, it had simply removed the barrier, stripped away the need for sleep and with it the illusion of safety that sleep provides. Before anyone could respond, before anyone could process the weight of those words, the subject let out one final breath, his body going limp against the restraints, that twisted smile still frozen on his face as the monitors flatlined, and just like that, it was over. The chamber sealed, the records classified, the entire experiment buried beneath layers of secrecy that ensured no one outside those walls would ever know what truly happened. But I remember everything, and even now, years later, I can't sleep the way I used to, because every time I close my eyes, I hear that voice again, calm and certain, whispering from somewhere just beyond the edge of thought, reminding me that it's still there, waiting, patient, watching, and I can't help but wonder if the real reason we sleep isn't to rest, but to keep something far worse from waking up. By day 9, the chamber had fallen into a silence so complete it began to feel unnatural, not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind that makes your ears ring and your thoughts grow louder just to fill the void. And at first we thought the microphones had failed because there was no sound at all. No voices, no movement, nothing, just a low static hum that made it difficult to breathe as we listened. But the equipment was functioning perfectly, which meant the silence was real, and that terrified us more than the screaming ever had. We tried to initiate communication, calling out to them through the intercom, asking if they were all right, reminding them of the promise of freedom if they completed the test. But there was no response, not even a whisper, and hours passed like that, stretching into something unbearable, until finally one of the senior officers ordered a brief cut to the gas supply, just enough to get their attention, and when we did, a single voice responded immediately, calm and steady, almost relieved, saying, "We no longer want to be freed." And I remember feeling my stomach drop because that wasn't desperation, that wasn't fear, it was acceptance, something far more dangerous. After that, the silence returned, heavier than before, and we were left with nothing but speculation and growing dread, until day 11 when one of the subjects began to laugh, Not loudly, not hysterically, but in a slow, quiet way that sounded almost thoughtful, like he had just realised something deeply amusing, and it went on for hours without pause, a soft, continuous chuckle that echoed through the speakers and crawled under our skin, and then just as suddenly as it started, it stopped, cutting off so cleanly it felt unnatural, like a switch had been flipped. By day 13, we could no longer ignore the fact that something had gone terribly wrong. Oxygen consumption inside the chamber had increased to levels that shouldn't have been possible for 5 men, suggesting extreme physical exertion. Yet there were still no audible signs of movement, no footsteps, no struggle, nothing to explain it. And the only conclusion left was one we didn't want to consider, that whatever they were doing inside, they were doing it quietly, deliberately, and in complete unison. The decision was made to open the chamber on day 14, not out of concern for the subjects, but because the data had become too inconsistent, too disturbing to continue without visual confirmation. And I remember standing behind the reinforced glass as the team prepared to unseal the door, my hands shaking despite every effort to steady them, because deep down I knew we weren't about to observe the results of an experiment, we were about to witness something we were never meant to see. When the door finally opened, the cell hit us first, a thick metallic stench of blood and decay so strong it made several of the staff gag and turn away. And for a moment no one could move. No one could even speak, because the scene inside the chamber was beyond anything we had imagined. Beyond anything that could be explained by sleep deprivation or psychological breakdown. It was something else entirely, something violent and deliberate and utterly inhuman. 3 of the 5 subjects were dead, their bodies mutilated in ways that didn't make sense. Flesh torn apart not in a chaotic frenzy, but with a kind of precision that suggested intent, as if the act itself had purpose, and what was missing from their bodies was nowhere to be found. No scattered remains, no signs of consumption, just absence. And the walls, the floor, even the observation glass were smeared with dried blood layered thick enough to obscure parts of the room entirely. The 2 who remained were still alive, if you could call it that, their bodies emaciated to the point where bone pressed sharply against skin, yet somehow they were moving, standing, watching us with the eyes that didn't look human anymore, eyes that held a kind of awareness that made it impossible to look away, and when one of the soldiers shouted at them to step back from the door, one of the subjects smiled, a slow, unnatural stretch of lips that revealed teeth stained dark with dried blood, and in a voice that sounded far too clear for someone in that condition, he spoke words that I still hear every time I try to sleep. We are what you hide from when you close your eyes at night. And in that moment, every instinct in my body screamed that we had made a mistake far greater than any of us could comprehend, because whatever those men had become, it wasn't something the experiment created, it was something the experiment had released.